Hi everybody and welcome back to my channel. I'm Lysha from Lysha Be Creative, and in today's tutorial we are going to be rounding out our plaid series. So if you've been following me this far, you know that I have been doing a lot of different videos showing you how you can create gorgeous plaid looks on Tumblr. So this is the final video for that series, and we're going to keep it traditional with the traditional red and black plaid, the buffalo plaid, to round out our plaid series. I'm also going to be doing a product review in this tutorial for HTVRont. I have some clear sticker vinyl that I'm going to be using to apply my image today, and so I want to be able to show you guys a little bit about how I use this product and what I overall think of this product. So, of course, everything I use in today's tutorial will be listed and linked in the description box below. Check that description box out for discount codes as well as links to all of my social media and Facebook group, Lysha Be Creative Community. If you loved today's video, and I hope that you do, feel free to give this video a huge thumbs up as well as subscribe to my channel. And if you don't want to miss videos from me, make sure you click that notification bell so that you're notified when I post my next video. So let's go ahead and jump right into today's tutorial. Hey everybody and welcome back to my channel. So we are going to be doing a buffalo plaid on a beautiful wine tumbler today. So this will round out the plaid series that I have been doing over the course of the last month or two. So really excited to get started with this tutorial. So in a medicine cup, I am mixing up 2 acrylic paints from Arteza. I got this in a pack of 24 right off of Amazon. I will link that down in the description box below. So it's a crimson red and they're black, and I'm just mixing a 75 to 25% mix of the red and black blended paint. And what I'm trying to accomplish is a darker red than the red paint that I'm using so that I have a nice blend, and this is what's going to cover my entire tumbler. So today we're working with a fully sanded and prepped 16-ounce wine tumbler that I purchased from the Steel Magnolia company. I will link their site in the description box below. Feel free to check them out. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a wide paintbrush that I have, and I'm going to give this wine tumbler a really good coat of this paint. And so the technique for using acrylic paint to be kind of your base coat when you're not using glitter is to do, strokes that are thin, the paint is thin, and that you're really just trying to coat and cover the entire tumbler. You're also going to want to do at least 2 to 3 coats of paint, and that's going to help you to diminish the appearance of those brush stroke lines that you typically get if you only do a coat of acrylic paint. So typically, I would be using spray paint for this, but I know that a lot of you are experiencing some spray paint shortages in your areas due to different factors, I'm sure. And so I wanted to be able to give you all an alternative to using spray paint, or as the weather begins to get colder, an alternative to having to go outside to spray paint your tumblers. So I'm going to give this tumbler a nice thin coat of this red paint. I'll let it dry, and then I will go in with a second coat. Once that second coat is dry, I'm going to put this on the turner to spin until completely dry and apply 1 coat of epoxy. So I want this to be my base coat, but because I know I'm going to be doing a lot of tape work to establish the plaid grid that I need to paint the other squares in, I want to make sure that I have a secure surface to work on that isn't going to chip or scratch my paint. With my epoxy fully cured, I am just going to create a line around the bottom portion of this wine tumbler. And so the bottom portion is not going to be a plaid look. We're going to be adding some gold glitter at the bottom because I know that if I went in with just my tape lines to create the grid, that would have some really weird squares. And so I want to try and avoid that by taping off that bottom section, making that a different color, and focusing my plaid checkered pattern on the top portion where the cup is a bit more straight. So now just with some painter's tape, I'm just going to tape off that bottom section and right along that line I created with my highlighter to be able to get started on the tape work that we're going to need to do in order to get the grid that we need to paint in our squares. With the bottom taped off, I'm going to go ahead and start creating those vertical lines on my tumbler to be able to create the squares I need so that I can get into painting. So you guys saw me do this in the very first video I put together for the plaid series. I'm just taking strips of painter's tape here, and I'm running them along my clothing to remove some of the stickiness because, again, we do only have one coat of epoxy on this cup, so you do run the risk of, with your very sticky tape, you could pull up your epoxy and paint. So really make sure that your tape is not too sticky and that your first line that you're starting off with is as straight as possible. So now just going along with those vertical strips of tape, I'm just going to go around and as close as I can to the piece of tape in front of it, create those vertical lines. Now you'll notice that even though I am using the straighter portion of the tumbler, there is still a taper to this cup. So you will have to wiggle your tape a little bit to create straighter lines, but you won't in some sections have painter's tape bumped right up against the one next to it. Otherwise, your lines will end up starting to be diagonal as you continue to do so all the way around the tumbler. So as I noticed this, I ended up switching gears and just started to make sure that I was making a straight line on the cup and not being so worried about applying it close to the tape next to it. And so there are going to be some squares on this plaid that are going to be bigger than others just based on the taper of the cup. But overall, it is a look that comes together and that looks like it's a natural plaid look. So I'm going to finish up on the vertical lines here, and then we're going to go ahead and move into our horizontal lines. Now that all of our vertical lines have been placed, we're going to then focus on the horizontal lines. So again, like I did in that very first video, I'm only going to use one strip of painter's tape here, and I'm going to use this painter's tape all the way down the length of the cup, and just using my craft knife, cut along the bottom edge of the painter's tape. And this is going to help leave what's left on the tumbler. That painter tape will now be cut into square sections, and that's going to help me very easily be able to pull those sections up and paint according to the pattern I need to. Now again, this is a tapered cup, so some of your tape while you're doing this will bubble a little bit. That's okay as long as you're keeping that bottom edge very taut and very tight to the cup and not really worrying about the top edge of that tape is not really going to be affected. So again, I'll just continue doing this through the bottom of the cup, and then we're going to map out our squares so we can start to paint. Now that all the tape has been cut into squares, I'm going to map out where the paint is going to be. So I'm starting with black, so a B for black, which is the darkest color, and I am going every other square along the top of the cup. So I ran into a problem, which I ran into in my very first tutorial as well, where I didn't have enough paint strips to be able to have an even amount of black squares. So I had to make a new line, which is going to create a very thin line of squares in one section. But all in all, it'll be perfectly fine because the decal that I'm going to be using is going to be over a white spray paint. So that's just the section that I will choose to do the white spray paint over. So once I've mapped out that first row of black squares, I then am going to create the color that's going to stay. So I'm using the S for stay. So that is going to be the color that's already the color of the tumbler. And so that is going to go to the left and right of the B and right below the letter B as well. And that creates kind of like that diamond shape that I mentioned in that first tutorial. So as soon as I have mapped those out, I'll then move on to the next row and put the B's again right under the first row of B's. So it'll go a B at the top row, a space, a B again for the third row. And so then I just do the same pattern that I did again, creating that diamond shape with the S's, which is S for stay, because that is the color that is under the painter's tape that will stay as is. And then finally, with the letter R for red, because that will be my bright red color, I'm just going back and filling in any open squares. Okay, so let's finally get into some painting. So now I'm ready to start with my darkest color, which is the black for the red buffalo plaid. And so what I'm doing is I'm just using my weeding tool here, and I'm removing all of the squares on the tumbler that have a B for black on top of them. So I'm just going to go all the way around the tumbler and remove those squares. That way I have all the squares open that I'm going to be coloring in with my black acrylic paint. With the majority of my black squares removed, let's get into painting on this tumbler. So now I'm going to take my paintbrush here, and I have a straight edge paintbrush with my black acrylic paint. This is just a craft barrel paint or an apple barrel paint that I purchased from Walmart. You can get craft paint from any craft store, and it doesn't matter as long as it's you know, a dark black color, but you also could do this with obviously very many other patterns and styles for plaids. And so I'm just going to paint over those open sections that I created by removing that painter's tape. So I'm going to go all the way around the cup and paint this first set of black squares. And what we're going to make sure that we're doing is that we're getting full coverage in these squares and that we are painting from edge to edge. So you do have to be careful as you go along your cup, because remember, some of those lines aren't perfectly straight and creating perfect squares. So making sure to be really careful while you're painting and that you're not painting into the wrong section where there may be gaps and things. So after that first coat of paint, I'm going to let that dry, and then I'm going to go in with a second coat of paint. So for the black, I only needed to do 2 coats of paint before you couldn't see my lines, but when I go in with the red, which I'll show you next, I did have to do 3 coats of this paint just because it's a much lighter color, so you were able to see those brushstroke lines a little bit more vividly. After the black paint dried, I removed all the squares that had an R on it for red, and then I put some of this red acrylic paint from Arteza into a medicine cup so that I could cover up those squares with this bright red paint. So for the red, as I mentioned just before this, I did have to go in with about 3 coats of this paint in order to make sure that you couldn't see all of the brushstroke lines in my brushstrokes. So making sure that you're doing thin coats within the squares, but getting full coverage, and then letting that set of paint dry before you go over with the second and third coats. It's important to let it dry, otherwise you're just going to continue to have to go back and forth, removing some of that bottom layer of paint and really not getting that full coverage that we're looking for. So I'm just going to continue to paint these until they are completely dry and giving them again 2 to 3 coats of paint so that I have full coverage and no brushstroke lines, and then we will set this aside to dry. Now that the acrylic paint has dried, I'm just going to remove all of the rest of the painter's tape off of this cup. So very carefully making sure to not pull up any paint or pull up my epoxy layer. I'm just going to remove these squares using my weeding tool if I need to get those kind of hard to get to squares of blue painter's tape. So once I have removed all of the tape from this cup, I'm going to put it on the turner and I'm going to apply a coat of epoxy. We want to seal these acrylic paints in before we can move on to extra glittering. So in my coat of epoxy that I'm going to put on this cup, I'm going to add a fine glitter called Diamond Magic from my Aisha Creations. I've used it in quite a few tutorials and it's something I absolutely love to use to add just a little bit of sparkle to my final coats of epoxy. So I'm going to use this to give this plaid a glittered look without having to do a full glitter over this tumbler. With my epoxy layer fully cured, we're going to go ahead and add the gold glitter to the bottom portion of this cup. So I'm not going to base paint the bottom of the cup. I'm just going to be using some metallic glitters, which I'm able to get full coverage so I don't have to worry about the base coat of the tumbler. So I'm just using some Mod Podge that I have in a little squeezable bottle, and I'm using this paintbrush that I got from the Dollar Tree. And I'm just applying my Mod Podge in a thin coat along the bottom. So along that dark red color along the bottom and just slightly above the plaid. So I'm making my brush strokes very uneven as I brush up that Mod Podge because I want to give it an ombre look without having to do the full coat with Mod Podge. So now I'm using Midas from Peachy Olive Glitters. I'm just going to go in with this chunky gold and just give a light dusting all over that bottom dark red portion to just give it kind of that base coat before I go in with the finer cut of this color. So I'm just going to dust that off. I'll put this glitter away and then we're going to go in with Gold Member. So I didn't put the chunky glitter on the bottom because I don't want to have any issues when I go to epoxy my cup with a lot of sanding I have to do. So I'm going to use Gold Member as a finer gold to be able to cover that bottom, create a nice smooth bottom for me, and then cover up any spaces I may have in between the glitter along the edges. So once that was done, I did brush off my tumbler with a dry bristle brush to get off that extra gold glitter that migrated towards the plaid portion, and then I let this dry. After it dried, I then brushed it off with a dry brush and went in again with another coat of my Mod Podge over the top of that gold glitter and did a second coat of glitter. So it's important to remember that with Mod Podge, you typically have to do at least 2 coats of Mod Podge in order to get full coverage and not to see any bare spots and things in your glitter patches. It's typically why I prefer to do epoxy method, but Mod Podge sometimes is just quicker and easier because you don't have to mix anything and you can just kind of apply it and then apply your glitter and not have to worry about doing any extra steps. So just something to think about. But as soon as I am finished with this gold glittering, I'm going to set the tumbler aside, let it dry for about 30 or so minutes, and then after that's dry, I will seal it with clear gloss spray paint from Rust-Oleum, and then I will get it back on the turner for another coat of epoxy. So I'm just going to do another 20 ml coat of epoxy on this tumbler so that it can be ready to be prepped for applying our decal. So now that my epoxy is dry, I am going to take my flat white spray paint and I'm going to spray just a small section of white paint, which is where my sticker vinyl image is going to go over top. So I'll let that dry for a bit of time, and then once that's dry, I'm going to go in with some clear gloss spray paint over that to make my surface a glossy surface for applying the printable vinyl sticker paper. Okay, so let's get into today's product review. So we're using clear sticker paper from HTVRont. So this is a newer product, something I haven't used before. I think it's best and most ideal for stickers. It comes with 2 packages inside. One is the laminated sheet that goes over your stickers, and the other is the one that you print on. So I had a tough time because they're not labeled, and so you'll see when I show you my 2 sheets here, I ended up accidentally printing on the laminate, not realizing it until it came out, which is why it's this faded look. And then I realized that they were 2 separate sheets because of course I just tried to rush through and didn't actually read the directions. So overall, it was very easy to use as soon as I was able to figure out that it was a 2-part process and not a 1-part process. But I do like that it was very easy to print on using just photo printing settings. So just make sure that when you are using this and printing your decal on top of this type of paper, that you are using the glossy photo print settings and not using the traditional print way. So that's just something to keep in mind. I made the mistake of not doing this beforehand and had to print this decal again, realizing that I hadn't changed my settings. So make sure that your settings are in photo and it's for glossy paper, and that you are changing your print quality to high. So I'm just going to take that laminated sheet and I'm going to put that right over the top. So what I kind of love about this sticker paper, and I never really thought that it was something that bothered me, was that I don't have to seal this. So normally if I was just using clear vinyl, I would take it over to my spray booth and I would seal it with some clear gloss spray, and I would do that quite a few times, but then you have to wait, 20 to 30 minutes before it dries and before you can apply the decal. So with this, because it comes with that laminated top sheet, you're basically getting rid of that step altogether. So you literally just apply that laminate sheet on top, and now it is a beautiful decal sticker that you can apply to your tumbler. So just something that I thought was pretty cool and different that I hadn't really thought of before. Okay, so now back to our tumbler. So I've sprayed my white spray paint and done clear gloss spray over top. And now because I have quite a bit of overspray, I'm just going to take a little bit of some acetone, so some pure acetone from the hardware store, and just go over the areas that have too much overspray and remove that. So acetone is what is going to remove your spray paint, and then I'm actually going to go in again with some rubbing alcohol as well to kind of clean up those streaks and things that sometimes acetone leaves behind with the spray paint. So I want to make sure that it's still a very natural look with the spray paint. So I do kind of like irregular brush strokes with my coffee filter that I'm using to clean up my edges so that it still looks like it's a bleach spot, but it doesn't look like I've done a lot of cleaning up. It still gives that kind of oversprayed look. It just doesn't have that cloudiness towards the edges. So I'm just going to clean this up with acetone and then go over those same sections as I mentioned with some rubbing alcohol, and then I'm going to set this aside to dry. So I'm going to wait for that acetone and rubbing alcohol to completely dry off, and then I'll go into applying my decal. So now I'm going to apply my decal here. So while my cup is in my cup cradle here, I'm just going to peel the backing off that printable sticker here and just apply it right over that bleach spot. So I'm going to use my squeegee tool, the felt edge of that, to smooth out the decal and make sure I don't get any air bubbles underneath the sticker, because sometimes you can see kind of that pocket of air. So making sure that it is nice and smooth, and then once that's done, this can go right on the turner. I don't have to do anything else with it. I did clean off the top edge and the rim and make sure there was a fine line of stainless steel, which I didn't show because you guys know how much I dislike sanding, but I did make sure to do that before I put that back on the turner for a final coat of epoxy. So here is this gorgeous cup in its final coats. I did add a little bit more of Diamond Magic to my final layers of epoxy, and so here's the big reveal. I hope that you loved today's video. It was so fun putting this plaid series together. If you loved it, please make sure you give this video a huge thumbs up, and I'll see you guys again next week.